The warm glow of late afternoon spilled across the glossy floors of the Sinclair Tower in downtown Atlanta. The city outside pulsed with life cars honking, people rushing, deals being made in the rush of a world that never slowed down. But, on the 38th floor, inside the private office of Darius Sinclair, the air was frozen, still, and heavy. He sat motionless behind a desk made of ebony wood. His dark skin, framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows that captured a skyline kissed by gold. His jaw clenched tight, his eyes locked on the last page of his late father's will. The legal paper trembled faintly in his grasp, not from grief, but from fury. 3 months. That's what the old man gave him. 3 months to get legally married or forfeit control of Sinclair Global Holdings to the board, the same men who had waited years to take his empire apart. No love required. No future promised. Just a name on paper and a deadline. Straight up ridiculous. Darius muttered and dropped the will on his desk like it had burned his fingers. Across from him sat his longtime legal advisor, Marcus Trent. Calm as ever, with a silver pen resting between his fingers. You know your father never trusted anyone with power, not even you. He thought marriage would soften your edges. This ain't about trust, Darius snapped. It's about control. As always, Marcus leaned forward slowly, voice smooth. Then fight control with strategy. Make it a business move. 1 year contractual, quiet, no mess. Darius narrowed his eyes. You want me to marry someone like I'm acquiring a company? Marcus gave a slow nod. Exactly. A merger on paper. Emotionally neutral. You fulfill the requirement, keep your legacy, and walk away clean. Darius looked past him toward the view past the glowing spire of downtown Atlanta, beyond the noise of everything he'd built. He didn't need a wife. He didn't even believe in marriage, but this wasn't about romance. This was about survival. Who, he asked at last? Marcus gave him a knowing look. You already know her. That same evening, Amina Brooks stood under the flickering hospital lights, gripping a coffee cup she couldn't afford, and reading the latest in a stream of medical bills she definitely couldn't pay. Her mother's condition was getting worse, and no matter how many double shifts she pulled or promotions she earned, it never felt like enough. She leaned against the cold wall of the hallway outside the ICU, her fingers tightening around the cup as she blinked back exhaustion. The smell of antiseptic, the distant sound of someone crying down the corridor, and the humming lights overhead were all she'd known for weeks. And then came a voice, low, familiar. Amina. She looked up, startled. Standing before her in a tailored charcoal coat, like he'd walked off the pages of a fashion magazine and into a world that didn't deserve him, was Darius Sinclair, the last man she expected to see here. Mr. Sinclair, she asked, confused, brushing a lock of her braided hair behind her ear. I need 5 minutes, he said. His tone was firm, not unkind. And even though she wanted to say no because she was tired, overwhelmed, and her mother was fighting for her life, she found herself nodding. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, a place that smelled of soup and despair. She stirred her coffee like it would somehow make it better. He didn't touch his. I have a proposition, he said plainly. Her eyebrows lifted in disbelief. I need to get married before the end of July. It's a requirement to inherit my father's company. I need someone I can trust. Someone discreet. Someone who won't expect romance or forever. Amina blinked. Surely he was joking. I'll pay you $5 million, he continued. In exchange, you agree to a 1-year marriage. Legal, public, but emotionally neutral. Neutral? She repeated, stunned. No intimacy, no obligations. You'll be respected, protected, and your privacy will be guarded at all times. I'll also make sure your mother receives full-time private care at the best facility in the city, effective immediately. Her breath caught. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath her. You think I'd sell myself for money? She asked, trying to summon some outrage. No, he said quietly. I think you're someone who'd do anything for the people you love, even make an impossible choice. And for a moment, she said nothing. Because that was the terrifying part. He was right. Her mother was slipping away. Time was not on her side. She couldn't save her with prayer alone. She needed help. And right now, that help was sitting across from her in a suit, offering her salvation disguised as a contract. "I'm not giving you an answer now," she said, her voice low but steady. "I wouldn't expect you to," he replied, standing as she turned to leave. Her fingers trembling, a quiet, dangerous thought slipped into her mind. This wasn't just a way out, it was a door, and stepping through it might either save her life or break her completely. Morning in South Atlanta was soft and gray, the sky hanging low like a blanket that refused to lift. Inside a modest third-floor apartment off Cascade Road, Amina Brooks sat on the edge of a worn-out couch, staring at the stack of medical bills crowding her kitchen counter. The living room was too small for dreams, but it had been enough for memories, pictures of her and her mum laughing over puzzles, takeout containers on the floor, Sunday gospel music echoing through cracked windows. But those moments had started fading the day her mother got sick. Amina rubbed at her tired eyes, glancing at the clock. 5:16 a.m. She hadn't slept, not really. She had come home after her overnight shift at the Sinclair Foundation, checked her mother's oxygen levels, changed her foreline, and sat beside her for hours, listening to the slow rise and fall of her breathing like it was the only sound keeping her anchored. Her mother, Mama Laverne, had once been a proud trauma nurse at Grady Memorial, the kind of woman who showed up early, stayed late, and prayed over every patient like they were her own. She raised Amina alone after her husband vanished when she was 4. Never spoke a bad word about him. Never asked for pity. She just worked, saved, sacrificed, and smiled through it all, until the diagnosis, end stage, kidney failure. The doctors had said the words like they were reading from a script. But to Amina, they hit like a siren in a quiet church. Everything after that became about survival, insurance battles, dialysis appointments, emergency visits, nights spent in folding chairs with vending machine dinners and silent prayers. Amina had given up everything: her writing scholarship, her weekends, her social life, to keep the bills paid and her mother alive. She worked herself numb, quiet, efficient, unshakable. Even her colleagues didn't know half of what she was carrying. They called her cold. They didn't see the girl who cried alone in the shower or bit her fist at night so her mother wouldn't hear her sob. They didn't know about the hallway she had paced all night that time her mother nearly died, or the prayers she had whispered into the ceiling, begging just for a little more time. That's why Darius Sinclair's offer wasn't just confusing, it was cruel. Cruel because it reminded her of something she had stopped allowing herself to feel: hope. Hope that maybe, for once, there could be an answer that didn't involve breaking herself in half. Hope that she could have a way out of the drowning. Hope that didn't come wrapped in fantasy, but in reality, with rules, contracts, and $5 million. But what scared her most wasn't the offer itself, it was the fact that a part of her, the part she'd buried beneath survival and scars, wanted to say yes. That afternoon, Amina sat beside her mother's hospital bed, gently smoothing the edges of the blanket tucked around her legs. Mama Laverne slept peacefully for once, her chest rising and falling with calm steadiness. Amina studied her face, softer now than it had been in months. She looked like the woman who used to hum Donny Hathaway in the kitchen while flipping pancakes on Saturday mornings. The woman who read bedtime stories in funny voices even after 12-hour shifts. The woman who gave everything. And what had Amina given her in return? A mountain of bills, an apartment with leaky faucets, a daughter who didn't have enough time or power to keep her safe. She closed her eyes and whispered to the ceiling, "I don't know what to do, Lord. But if this is the door you're opening, I need to know I can walk through it without losing myself." Her phone buzzed. Another message from the hospital billing office. Another deadline. She stared at the screen, then at her sleeping mother. She already knew the answer. The next day, the hospital cafeteria was as dreary as ever: sour coffee smell, buzzing lights, and the low murmur of exhaustion that hung in the air like smog. Amina sat by the window in her blue scrubs, stirring a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her fingers shook slightly, but her face was composed. She heard footsteps. She didn't need to turn. I figured you'd come, she said quietly. Darius sat across from her, placing a small folder on the table. This is the preliminary agreement, he said. No small talk, nothing binding until you sign. But I wanted you to have every detail. Amina didn't reach for it. You want to marry me, yes, for a year, on paper, just to secure your company. Yes, no touching, only if you want to. She gave him a look. Is that clause in the contract? No, he said, eyes steady. That's my promise. She leaned back. Her gaze was unreadable. And the money. 5 million. One before the ceremony. The rest after the agreement ends. And your mother's care starts the moment you say yes. Amina looked down at her tea, her heart pounding. Why me? She asked finally. Darius didn't hesitate. Because you're smart, loyal, discreet, and you don't chase spotlight, you carry storms without flinching. That stopped her, not because it was flattery, but because it felt, true. I have conditions, she said. He nodded. Go ahead. 1. The first million hits my account before the ceremony. Done. 2. My mother's care starts now. I get full access to everything, of course. 3. We sleep in separate rooms. Always no confusion behind closed doors. Understood. And 4. No cameras. No fake articles, no narrative built around me. If I do this, it's for survival, not to be your PR trophy. Darius met her eyes. You have my word. She stared at him for a long moment, then reached for the folder. The contract was printed cleanly, organized like a business proposal. It should have felt cold, but to Amina, it felt ... clear. She flipped through the pages slowly, her fingers brushing across the lines like they might cut her, but they didn't. I need 24 hours, she said. Take 48, he replied, standing as he turned to leave. She called out softly, Mr. Sinclair. He stopped. If I say yes, ... what happens next? He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Then, voice steady, he said, then, I become your husband, and you become the woman who saved everything I ever built. And just like that, he walked away, leaving Amina with a folder full of promises, and a heart full of questions she didn't know how to silence anymore. The sky over downtown Atlanta was slate gray, heavy with clouds and the hush of an incoming storm. Inside the private meeting suite on the 50th floor of Sinclair Tower, the silence was thicker than the weather. Amina sat across the long mahogany table from Darius Sinclair, her back straight, hands calmly folded in her lap, though her pulse throbbed at her temples. She wore a slate blue blouse that framed her deep brown skin like silk on mahogany. Her hair, pulled into a neat low twist, gave her a quiet strength. A grace that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. Between them sat the revised marriage contract, stamped, notarized, and ironclad. I reviewed every clause, Amina said, voice, even though her mouth was dry. And I'm willing to proceed under 3 final conditions. Darius didn't flinch, he simply nodded. Go on. 1, she said, steady and clear. The first payment must clear into my account by this Friday. Not a promise. Funds. Done, he replied without hesitation. 2. I reserve the right to approve or decline any public event or appearance. That includes me. I'll play the part when needed. But I will not be paraded for press. You'll have final say on all engagements, he agreed. She paused before the third. 3. We keep separate rooms. Always, no blurred lines. Number. Late night confusion. For a split second, something flickered in Darius's eyes, regret, doubt, curiosity. She couldn't tell, but then, with a slow nod, he said, You'll be respected every step of the way. Amina exhaled, just once. Good, then, unexpectedly, Darius leaned forward slightly. Just enough for the edge of his voice to lose some of its boardroom polish. Are you sure you want to do this? Amina didn't answer right away. She studied him for a beat, his smooth, dark skin, the way his jaw tensed when he asked questions that required answers too vulnerable for business meetings. "No," she admitted. "But certainty ain't something I've ever had the luxury of." Their eyes met, quiet, unflinching. Darius rose and walked to the nearby minibar. He poured 2 glasses of water-not champagne. No theatrics. He set one in front of her. "No toast?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, trying to ease the tightness in her chest with humor. "This isn't a celebration," he said. "A transaction," she nodded, honest, cold, and yet strangely comforting. As she reached for the glass, her fingers brushed his. Just briefly, it was nothing, and it was everything. She pulled back. He didn't. "I've also finalized the transfer," Darius said. "Your mother will be moved to Harmony Crest Private Clinic tomorrow morning. She'll have a cardiac and renal team on standby, around the clock. You'll get the treatment plan tonight." Amina's voice softened. "Thank you." He met her gaze, sharp and serious. "I'm not doing this as a favor, I know," she said, "but I'm still grateful." They fell into silence again. No ticking clock. No music. Just the quiet reality of what they were both about to do. Amina reached into her purse and pulled out a black pen. It clicked softly, echoing off the glass windows behind them. She hovered above the contract, then signed her name with a steady hand. Her signature was elegant, confident, more controlled than she felt. She slid it across the table. Darius took the pen and added his name without fanfare. No smile, no sigh. Just 2 names on paper that would change everything. "It's done," he said, and somehow, the words felt like a door closing behind them. A lock clicking into place. He handed her a sleek white envelope. Inside, a detailed list of public events, the names of designers hired to curate her new public image, and the official wedding date, February 18th, 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to become someone else. Amina stood. "I should go. My mum's waiting. My driver will take you home." She turned to leave. Her heels made soft clicks against the polished floor, but just before she reached the door, she paused. "Mr. Sinclair," he looked up. "Do you ever worry," she said quietly, "that a decision you made to protect yourself might end up exposing something you didn't even know you were hiding?" Darius's expression didn't shift for a long moment. Then finally, he replied, "Every day." She nodded and left without another word, and as the elevator doors closed around her, Amina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, not fear, not regret, but the sharp, rising weight of possibility. The boutique in Buckhead looked more like an art gallery than a clothing store. Vaulted ceilings, warm gold lighting, and designer gowns displayed like museum pieces. Amina Brooks stood in front of a floor-length mirror in a pale ivory gown that hugged her frame like liquid silk. It was elegant, expensive, and nothing like the clearance rack dresses she usually wore for foundation galas. Her reflection stared back at her shoulders bare, her rich brown skin glowing under the lights. Her natural curls tucked into soft waves pinned just behind her ears. Her lips bore a bold red she'd never dared to wear before. "You're stiff," said a calm, confident voice behind her. Zora Nidoy, Alexander's elite image consultant, stepped forward and gently adjusted the neckline of the dress. "Not used to being a mannequin," Amina said flatly. "You're not a mannequin," Zora replied without looking up. "You're becoming a message." Amina raised an eyebrow. "What message?" Zora met her eyes in the mirror. "That you belong in his world." There was no judgment in her voice, no mockery, just truth. Over the next 10 days, Amina's life shifted into something unrecognizable. Early mornings filled with etiquette, coaching, voice training, walking lessons, wardrobe fittings, and back-to-back sessions in media prep. She was drilled on how to hold a wine glass on camera, how to answer invasive questions with poise and vagueness, and even how to cross her legs without creasing a $10,000 dress. It was exhausting, but it was also awakening. Zora didn't treat her like a doll. She treated her like a soldier preparing for a battlefield of whispers and cameras. "You're going to be seen," Zora told her one afternoon while adjusting a hemline. "They'll try to decide who you are before you even speak. So you better decide for yourself first. Amina didn't reply then, because deep down, she didn't know yet who she was anymore. That night, she returned to her tiny apartment in South Atlanta for the last time. Her belongings were packed into neat boxes. The landlord had been paid 6 months in advance to hold the unit just in case. She moved slowly through the rooms, fingers brushing the edge of her mother's prayer beads, the chipped countertop, the frayed edges of an old quilt. Her whole life had been built in this space on survival. On purpose, on sacrifice. Now she was stepping into a role built on illusion, in the bathroom mirror. Her reflection was almost a stranger full lashes, glowing skin, soft lips with high-end color, and the silk dress for tomorrow's gala hanging behind her like it belonged to someone else, and maybe it did. The next evening, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the Four Seasons Atlanta. Amina stepped out into the glare of the red carpet, cameras already flashing, her gown swept around her like smoke off thresholder, and dripping with grace. Her diamond earrings sparkled beneath soft lighting, and her skin shimmered with the delicate touch of an expensive lotion Zora had insisted on. For a heartbeat, she froze. Photographers were shouting her name, Amina Brooks, who had once walked 3 miles to a clinic with her mother in a rainstorm, who ate ramen for weeks to afford new scrubs, who buried her dreams in a shoebox because life didn't leave room for luxury. Now, everyone wanted a piece of her. At the top of the marble stairs, Darius Sinclair stood waiting in a tuxedo so sharp it looked carved. He extended his hand. She took it. His fingers were warm, firm, grounding. "You look prepared," he said, his eyes scanning her face. "Not beautiful," she teased softly, surprising even herself. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. That would be a dangerous thing to say. Inside, the ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers, soft jazz, and the low buzz of New York's most elite. They walked in sync, every gesture perfected. The brush of his hand at her back, the way she leaned into his shoulder during introductions, the quiet whispers exchanged that made her blush, even though she couldn't remember what he said. And yet, something shifted. It didn't feel like acting. It started to feel real. Later, as they stepped onto the balcony for air, the city glittered below them. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Amina asked, turning to him. "Played pretend," Darius said, gazing out over the skyline. "More times than I can count. But never with someone who made it feel like it wasn't an act." She didn't have time to respond. A camera flash popped behind them. Reflexively, Darius turned and kissed her cheek. But she didn't move. For one suspended second, she wondered, what if the next kiss wasn't for the cameras? The next morning, her name was everywhere. Mystery woman steals spotlight at gala. From assistant to fiancé, who is Amina Brooks? Billionaire's bride-to-be breaks the mold. Her inbox exploded with requests, interviews, partnerships, fashion features. Designers were offering custom lines. Publicists were celebrating. Sophia had already called to say she crushed it. Amina said nothing, just stared out the window of the black Bentley as the city blurred by. "Was that everything you expected?" Darius asked from beside her, his voice unreadable. "If you mean the cameras." The whispers. "The woman who asked if I was an escort," she said calmly. "Then yes. It was everything I expected." He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. "And the rest?" he asked. She paused. "I didn't expect to enjoy any of it." That answer lingered in the air between them. They arrived at the Sinclair estate in Buckhead by early afternoon. It was vast, modern, pristine, silent, the kind of wealth that didn't speak. It whispered. "This'll be home," Darius said, his tone shifting back to neutral. "Let me show you to your room." They walked down long corridors of white marble, minimalist art, and curated silence. He stopped at a tall, dark wooden door and opened it. "This is yours," he said. "Everything's been arranged. If anything's missing, just ask." The suite was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a terrace, a grand piano in the corner, a walk-in closet that looked like it belonged to a celebrity. But it didn't feel like hers. "Not yet, and you're just down the hall?" she asked. He nodded. If you need anything, I'm here. But we'll keep our boundaries, as promised. She looked at him carefully. Do you always keep your promises? His jaw flexed. When I make them. Yes, she didn't say anything else. That night, she stood on the terrace, watching the garden below's pool, glimmering under soft lights. The world was quiet, controlled, curated, and yet something inside her wouldn't sit still. Then came a knock. At her door, she opened it and found Darius there, not in a suit, but in dark jeans and a sweater. A man. Not a mogul. I'm going for a walk in the garden, he said. Want to come? No press, no cameras, just air. She nodded. They walked side by side through the cool night, the scent of magnolias in bloom, their shoulders brushing now and then. This place doesn't feel like you, she said. It isn't, he admitted. It's what people expected. And what would you have chosen? She asked. Darius stopped near the fountain, hands in his pockets. Something smaller, simpler. Somewhere I could hear music again. She blinked. You don't strike me as the quiet type. He glanced sideways. You don't strike me as the kind of woman who signs contracts with strangers. They exchanged a soft smile. For once, not for the cameras. As they reached the patio steps, he asked, Do you regret any of this? She didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she was starting to wonder if the only thing she might regret was not letting herself feel more. Snow blanketed the hills of northern Georgia like powdered sugar. The air was crisp, sweet with pine and winter silence. Inside a sunlit suite at the Sinclair family's countryside estate, Amina stood by the window wrapped in satin, her breath fogging the glass. The wedding gown she wore was nothing extravagant, just soft ivory silk that skimmed her curves, like it had been made for her. No rhinestones, no lace, just purity and power. She had picked it herself, quiet, clean, strong. Behind her, Zora stepped closer, fixing the last strand of Amina's hair into place with a pin shaped like a magnolia blossom. You look like a woman no one will forget, Zora said softly. Amina gave a faint smile in the mirror. I don't want to be unforgettable. I just want to get through this. Zora placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Then do it your way. One breath at a time. Downstairs, Mama Laverne was already seated in the front row of the small glass pavilion where the ceremony would take place. The move to the private clinic had given her color again, warmth in her cheeks, light in her eyes. She clutched a tissue, already dabbing tears before anything had even started. To her, this was a dream come true. Her baby girl, finally being taken care of. Amina didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. The wedding was elegant, intimate. Just under 50 guests, board members, carefully chosen media outlets, and close connections. The whole thing was choreographed to perfection. From the music to the guest list. But when Amina walked in and met Darius's eyes at the altar, all of that slipped away. He was waiting, tall and composed, dressed in a classic black suit, no tie. His stillness radiated command. But when he looked at her, something deeper shimmered in his gaze. Not performance. Not expectation. Recognition. Neither of them smiled. But they didn't need to. They understood exactly what this wasn't. What it wasn't pretending to be. She walked slowly, every step deliberate. Her heels tapped softly, her pulse pounding in her ears. When she reached him, he held out his hand. She took it. His grip was firm, steady. Like an anchor, the officiant began. But Amina didn't hear the words. Just his breath near hers. The warmth of his skin. The weight of the moment. When it was time for rings, Darius reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple gold band. No diamonds, no engraving, just real. He slid it onto her finger with care. Looking her in the eye, she did the same for him. You may now. He leaned forward and kissed her cheek. It was light, chaste, but her skin burned. They turned to face the guests, hands still linked. The applause was soft, respectful. Carla cried openly. Zora wiped the corner of her eye discreetly. But Amina felt no joy, no sadness. She felt changed, not by the contract. By him. The reception that followed was elegant gold, lighting, jazz quartet, and soft candlelight flickering over crystal and china. It was modest by billionaire standards, but still far from anything Amina had ever imagined. Darius never left her side. He introduced her with quiet confidence, let her lead conversations, and never once overplayed the act. They danced only once. It wasn't staged for cameras. No announcements, just the two of them swaying on the floor while a saxophone hummed. In the background, "You move like someone who's done this before," she murmured, hand on his shoulder. "I haven't," he replied, voice low. "Not like this." Their eyes locked. Neither looked away. Later, Amina excused herself to check on her mother. She found her by the fireplace. Blanket over her legs and a soft smile on her face. "You are glowing," Mama Laverne whispered, squeezing her hand. "He loves you, I can see it." Amina bit her lip. "He takes care of what he values." Her mother held her tighter. "And so do you. That's why you're gonna be just fine." Amina nodded, even though she didn't believe it yet. Back in the ballroom, she spotted Darius standing alone by the bar. His sharp profile was cast in golden light, his face unreadable, not distant, not cold, just ... unsettled. She wanted to ask what he was thinking. She didn't, single quotes too. Instead, she stepped beside him and whispered, "I think we fooled them." He looked at her, long and hard. "Did we?" The question hit her in the chest. They were the perfect couple from a distant, polished, untouchable. Headlines crowned them as the most intriguing duo in Atlanta. Their names became Photos of her hand on his chest and his lips near her ear circled everywhere, but behind the closed gates of the Sinclair estate. Reality was quieter, colder. Pananess, Suite, was on the east wing. Darius lived in the west. In between was silence. The staff moved like shadows, careful not to notice how little warmth passed between the couple. Dinners were brief, eaten on opposite ends of a glossy dining table. Conversations were about stock performance, foundation strategies. Scheduled press appearances, never about them. Still, small things began to shift. Amina took charge of the Sinclair Foundation's community programs. She spent her days launching literacy projects, mentoring kids from underfunded schools, sitting on classroom floors with children who had never seen a black woman in power speak to them like equals. And when she came home, she didn't talk about it. But sometimes, late at night, she'd see the video reports playing on Darius's laptop as he sat alone in his study, watching, never commenting. In her room, Amina played piano, quietly, only at night. At first, it was old pieces, then her own compositions, soft melodies she'd make up as she went. Like memories searching for a voice. She didn't know Darius could hear her through his window. He never said anything, but he never closed it. Either. One morning, she found a book outside her door. Love in the Time of Cholera, her favorite. She'd never told anyone. Inside the cover was a single pressed magnolia. No note. A week later, she left a white rose on the entry table to his study. Her answer, on a quiet evening. Long after the staff had gone home, Amina stood barefoot in the kitchen sipping water. She turned and there was Darius. Shirt sleeves rolled up. No tie, no walls. "You hate those things, don't you?" he asked. She blinked. "What things?" The forced smiles. The questions. The way they look at you like you're a product. "I thought you loved control," she said. "I do," he said. "But I'm starting to hate pretense." Amina smirked faintly. "Maybe you're becoming human." He didn't reply, but the silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was warm. They still returned to separate rooms each night. Still didn't touch. Still never crossed the line. But the distance was no longer safe. One night, a storm swept through the hills, lightning flashing, power flickering out. Amina stepped into the hallway and collided with Darius. Neither of them moved. The moonlight cast silver across his face. She whispered, "I'm fine." He didn't speak, just reached up and gently brushed a loose curl from her face, then walked away. But that single touch lingered on her skin for hours, and as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she realized the danger wasn't in pretending anymore. The danger was that she no longer wanted to. The sky over Buckhead was deep blue, scattered with stars like diamonds on velvet. The air was unusually still, touched with jasmine and warm southern night. A rare meteor shower had been forecasted, something Amina used to stay up for as a girl, back when dreams still lived on her ceiling. Now, she stood wrapped in a cream shawl on the balcony outside, her sweet eyes lifted toward the heavens, trying to remember what it felt like to wish for something just because she wanted it, not because she needed it to survive. Behind her, the house was dark, quiet, empty of staff and cameras for the first time in weeks. She didn't even hear him knock, but when she turned, Darius stood in her doorway. No suit, no mask, just slacks, and a plain black long-sleeved shirt, sleeves pushed up to his forearms, casual, real. "I figured you'd be out here," he said. She gave him a small smile. "Didn't take you for a Kaiser." "I'm not," he replied, stepping onto the balcony beside her. "But I heard tonight was rare. And lately, I find myself drawn to rare things." They didn't speak after that. Just stood there, side by side, watching the sky above them. The wind carried the scent of the garden orange blossom, fresh soil, memory. A streak of light shot across the sky. Amina followed it with her eyes. "You ever make wishes?" Darius asked softly. "I used to," she replied, "before I realized wishes don't pay hospital bills." He looked at her then, but he didn't argue. Another meteor blazed across the sky, leaving a faint golden trail before disappearing. "When I was little," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "I used to believe if I counted 100 stars without blinking, something good would happen." "And did it?" he asked gently. She turned to him. The night softened her face, but her eyes were all steel and truth. "Eventually, you showed up with $5 million and the best doctors in the state." Darius looked away for a moment. "That wasn't a gift, Amina. That was a deal." "I know," she said, "but for a man who insists it's all business, you've been surprisingly careful with my feelings." His jaw shifted slightly. "And you," he said, "have been careful with mine." The words hung there like mistlight, but impossible to ignore. Amina crossed her arms over her chest, rubbing at her sleeves. "Sometimes I wonder if we're both pretending not to feel anything because we're scared of what it would mean if we stopped." Darius turned to face her fully. "And what if we did stop pretending?" She froze. The silence between them was no longer peaceful. It pulsed. It ached. "I don't even know what's real anymore," she admitted, eyes locked on his contract. "This house, the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." His voice came quiet. "That's real." Another star streaked overhead. Neither of them noticed. He stepped closer, not touching her yet, but near enough to feel her breath. "I need you to tell me to stop," he said. She didn't, because she didn't want to. His hand reached up slowly, brushing a curl from her face. Lingering at her jaw, she didn't flinch. She leaned into it, eyes closing for just a second. And then, finally, the kiss. Not for the cameras, not staged or hesitant. It started soft, searching, uncertain. But when his hand moved to her waist, and hers rose to his chest, something broke open between them. The kiss deepened, heat curling into gentleness, tenderness melting into need. They held each other like they were the last solid thing left in a world built on pretense. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together. Neither said a word. They didn't need to. The kiss had said everything. But Amina knew in that moment something had changed. Not just between them. Inside her, she wasn't afraid of the contract ending anymore. She was afraid of what might begin in its place. The next morning was brighter, warmer, but Amina couldn't stop remembering the way he kissed her, not just with heat, but with care. They hadn't crossed any lines after that. They returned to their separate rooms like nothing had happened. Like everything was still in control. But nothing felt the same. The space between them wasn't empty now, it was charged. She kept her days full, phone calls about foundation programs, updates on her mother's improving health, budget meetings, and staff interviews. Everything she used to do without thinking now felt mechanical, Because somewhere, under every report, every schedule, every prepared statement, her mind kept drifting to him. The way he looked at her, the way he waited. That evening, he invited her to join him in the garden. No staff, no wine glasses filled by servers, just a bottle of red he opened himself, and 2 glasses clinking softly under the soft lights of the pergola. They sat across from each other, the candlelight flickering between them like a quiet secret. "I've been thinking about Paris," Darius said, swirling the wine. "I went there once. Alone. Years ago." She tilted her head, intrigued. "You don't strike me as someone who travels without an itinerary." "I didn't," he said. "I thought maybe if I got far enough away from what was expected of me, I'd find out who I really was." "And did you?" she asked. "No, but I learned I hate being alone." Amina looked down at her hands. Candlelight danced across her fingers. She inhaled deeply, then looked up. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. He didn't shift, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "I've never been with anyone before," she said, voice even, but low. I'm still a virgin." His eyes didn't move from hers. "I'm not saving myself. I'm not afraid. I just never felt safe enough. Never felt like I could let go. I've been too busy keeping people alive to learn how to be soft." Darius sat up, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't speak over her. He didn't interrupt. "I thought love would take something from me I couldn't afford to lose," she finished. "But last night, that kiss, it didn't feel like pretending." He leaned in slowly, setting his glass down. "You've never owed anyone an explanation for how you protected your heart. Least of all me," he said. She searched his face, unsure what she was looking for. "But I wanted you to know, because if we go any further, I need you to know who I really am. Not the woman in the magazines. Not Mrs. Sinclair. Just Amina." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, gentle. "Still, I see you," he said. "I've been seeing you every single day." Her chest tightened, but not in fear. It was like something in her had finally unlocked. Then, softly, he added, "And I didn't expect it, but I think I'm falling for you." No grand speech, no sweeping background music, just the truth, plain and terrifying. She couldn't speak. Jess stared at their hands, his thumb brushing slow circles on her knuckles. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "I'll wait," he said. She looked up at him and, for the first time since their wedding day, let her guard fall completely. Not with another kiss, not with her body, but with silence. The kind of silence that trusts someone to hold space for your truth without needing to fill it. And in that moment, beneath soft lights, with no contract between them, no script to follow, Amina didn't feel like a woman pretending to be a wife. She felt like a woman finally being chosen. Not because of a deal, but despite it. The Sinclair estate in Savannah wasn't flashy like the one in Buckhead. It was older wood floors worn soft with memory, walls lined with ancestral portraits and quiet pride. The kind of wealth that didn't flaunt itself with crystal chandeliers or velvet rugs. It whispered with silence, subtle power, and heritage. Amina's heels clicked gently on the stone steps as she followed Darius to the front door. "Your mother prefers intimate dinners," he had warned on the drive. "No press, no photographers, no hovering staff, just conversation." She had nodded calm on the outside, but behind her lashes, anxiety coiled tight. This wasn't a media event. This wasn't a boardroom. This was Margaret Sinclair, legend in Southern society. A woman whose approval couldn't be bought, charmed, or convinced. A woman Darius respected deeply and kept at arm's length for good reason. They were ushered into a drawing room that looked like something out of a vintage novel. Firelight danced off dark wood and glass, and there, standing tall in a navy silk blouse and cream trousers, was the woman herself. Silver hair swept up, diamond earrings, a posture so upright it made Amina stand straighter on instinct. "Miss Brooks," Margaret said, extending a hand. "I've been expecting this day." Amina accepted it with confidence and calm. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Sinclair." Margaret's smile was polite. Cool, we'll see. Dinner was set for 3. No waiters, no background music, just heirloom china, candles, and the soft clinking of crystal as the meal began. Margaret didn't waste time. So Amina, she said, sipping her Bordeaux. How long have you worked with Darius? Almost 2 years, Amina replied. And how long have you been married? Amina met her gaze without flinching. 6 weeks. Ma'am, that's quite fast. Sometimes life doesn't wait. Margaret gave a small nod. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't disapproval either. The conversation shifted liturgy, music, art. Margaret's questions weren't just small talk, they were tests, probes, evaluations. Amina answered with honesty. She talked about her mother's love for old soul records, how she played piano to clear her mind, her preference for storytelling over abstract modern art, and then unexpectedly Margaret smiled. You know, she said, placing her glass down, Darius used to play piano too. Amina turned to him in surprise. You did? He cleared his throat, a little embarrassed. Years ago, Margaret added, his father thought music was a waste of time. But I'd hear Chopin in the house at night. Darius would sneak into the conservatory when he thought everyone was asleep. Amina looked at him differently. Not as the businessman, not the billionaire, but the boy who once needed to hide his softness in silence. After dessert, Margaret rose and gestured to a side room. Walk with me, Amina. They entered a small conservatory filled with houseplants and soft yellow lamps. Outside, snow had just started to fall. Brushing the windows like a secret, Margaret poured tea for both of them. Rosehip and Mintand sat across from Amina without pretense. You're not what I expected, she said. Amina raised a brow. I imagine I'm not the first woman to surprise you. No, but you're the first one who isn't trying to impress me. Amina gave a quiet smile. Is that a compliment? It's a warning. Margaret's tone shifted. The steel in her voice wasn't cruel, it was protective. I've watched Darius build walls so high he can't breathe behind them. His father made him that way. Taught him to hide behind power, business, legacy. So when I saw youth this deal, this arrangement, assumed you were just another strategy. Amina said nothing. She sipped her tea. But you're not pretending, Margaret continued. I can see it in your eyes. So I'll ask you plainly. Why do you love my son? The question dropped like a thunderclap.amin. Could have lied. Deflected, spoken in polished, practiced lines, but she didn't. She placed her teacup down and folded her hands in her lap. I don't know if I'd call it love. Not yet, but I admire him. Not the headlines, not the brand. The man who honors his word when no one's watching. The one who remembers what books I love. Who listens without needing to fix everything. When he looks at me, I want to become the kind of woman who deserves that look. Margaret was quiet. Then she nodded once. That's the most honest thing I've heard in years. They sat in silence for several minutes, not tense, not strained, just earned. When they returned to the drawing room, Darius stood as they entered, his eyes flicking instantly to Amina's, checking, searching. Margaret placed a hand on his arm. She's not here for what you can give her, she said softly. Be careful not to lose her by forgetting what you need. She kissed his cheek, then left the room. Darius blinked. What just happened? Amina smiled faintly. I think she likes me. She terrifies me. She terrifies everyone. They shared a quiet laugh, one of the few real ones they'd had in weeks. And for the first time, Amina felt something shift. Not just between them. Inside herself, she didn't feel like an outsider anymore. She was beginning to believe. Maybe she actually belonged. Rain fell softly over Buckhead, tapping against the Sinclair Estate's windows like a lullaby. The whole house seemed to slow down, wrapped in the hush of an Atlanta night, rare and gentle. The air smelled like earth, and peace-wet, magnolias, and marble halls. Inside the music room, Amina sat at the grand piano, her fingers resting on the keys though she wasn't playing. The sheet music on the polished wood still bore its original title, unexpected contract. But earlier that day, she had taken a pen and scratched it out. Now, in her smooth, looping script, it read, New Beginning. Behind her, she sensed him before she heard him. Darius, he didn't speak, didn't announce himself, he just stepped into the room and stood beside her, close enough to feel, far enough to respect the space between them. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you ever think about that first night? In the hospital, I think about it more than I should, he replied quietly. You were the most dangerous woman I'd ever met. She smiled faintly. And you were the most dangerous man I'd ever trusted. Darius stepped forward. There was no tension in his shoulders tonight. No suit, no armor. Just the man, and the silence between them felt like the deepest truth they'd ever shared. Now, he said, I'm just a man who's terrified of losing you. Amina's voice trembled. There's nothing left to lose. We've already given each other everything. He took her hand, not like a businessman, not like a man sealing a deal, but like a man reaching for something sacred. No, he said. We haven't, not yet. She didn't reply. Instead, she stood still holding his hand and led him quietly out of the music room, past the echoing hallway. Through the soft shadows of the estate, and into her sweet Dot. No contracts, no conditions, just breath, Dot, and choice. The room was lit only by the rain-muted glow of the city outside. Amina stood at the edge of her bed, her eyes locked on his. He didn't rush. He didn't assume. He just reached for her with a reverence she felt in her bones. Their lips met in a kiss. That was slow, deep, deliberate. His hands cupped her face like she was something rare. Hers slid up the back of his neck, grounding herself in the heat of him. One layer at a time. The walls came down. Not just the clothes, but the fear. He carried her to the bed like a man who knew what it meant to hold something fragile. And when they finally lay together skin to skin, breath to breath, it wasn't about seduction. It was about surrender. It was about trust. His hands mapped the places she'd guarded for years. Her body responded not with fear, but with welcome, with longing, with safety. When it was over, when their bodies stilled and the silence wrapped around them like silk, he didn't let go. He held her closer, pressed his forehead to hers, and then, in the softest voice, he whispered, I love you, Amina. Tears slid down her cheeks, not out of fear, but relief. I love you too, Darius. Not as the man who signed a contract, not as the billionaire who saved her mother, but as the man who had seen all of her and stayed. 3 months later, spring bloomed across Georgia like a promise. In the backyard of the Buckhead estate, Amina stood barefoot beneath a blooming arbor, the scent of gardenias thick in the air. Her dress was simple cream cotton, bare shoulders, soft curls tumbling down her back. There were no cameras this time, no media, no expectations, only love. Mama Laverne sat under a white umbrella, fully recovered, eyes shining. Zora dabbed away tears in the front row. Darius waited beneath the arbor in a navy linen suit, no tie, no performance, just the man. They were renewing their vows. But this time, there were no conditions, no legal clauses, no exit strategies, just truth. And as Amina walked toward him, a soft breeze lifted her veil, carrying a single magnolia petal into the sky. What began as a contract had become a love story. One not defined by what was written, but by what was felt, proven not in grand declarations, but in silence, in small choices, in one night that changed everything. The Sinclair estate, once a symbol of power and perfection, now pulsed with something it had never held before: peace. Not silence wrapped in control, but quiet born of connection. Love, finally allowed to breathe without rules. Amina stood on the back terrace at sunrise, wrapped in one of Darius's old button-down shirts, watching the lights spill across the garden like gold honey. The magnolia trees were blooming again, bright, defiant, alive. Like her, behind her footsteps approached, she didn't turn. She didn't have to. His arms slid around her waist from behind, warm and steady. I had a dream last night, he said into her neck. She smiled. Was I in it? No, he murmured. You were the whole thing. She leaned into him. You used to be scared of dreaming. I was, he admitted. Because I didn't know if I was allowed to want something real. Amina turned in his arms, looking up into the eyes of the man she'd once signed a contract with. The man who had given her a million reasons to be cautious on, then one reason big enough to believe again. It was never about what we signed, she said quietly. It was about what we chose after the ink dried. He kissed her softly. No urgency, no performance, just presence. In the weeks that followed, they lived slower. Softer. Darius stepped back from daily operations, letting trusted partners run the board, while he focused on expanding the foundation's reach. He and Amina traveled to rural schools, met with young black entrepreneurs, hosted literacy events in underserved neighborhoods. She became a name children learned to trust not because of who she married, but because of who she showed up as. At night, they played piano together. Sometimes jazz, sometimes nothing at all, just her, him, and the echo of something they'd built from the ashes of a deal. One evening, while sorting through old folders in the office, Amina found the original marriage contract tucked in a drawer, untouched since the day it ended. She smiled, then tore it in half and tossed it in the fire. Not out of anger, but because they didn't need proof anymore. The world still asked questions sometimes. Journalists wanted to know how a story that started as a transaction became something people called a modern fairy tale. They gave no explanations. They didn't need to, because true love doesn't require spectacle. It asks only for courage to stay, when walking away was easier to speak truth, when silence was safer to love someone fully after seeing every reason not to. And in the end, that's what made their story real. Not the contract, not the vows, not the wealth, but the night two hearts chose to stop pretending and start becoming.